Hi everyone, this is going to be a video walkthrough of problem 3, which is IntList to array. So for this problem, we will implement a version of array copy that copies elements from an int list into an array of ints. As a reminder, here is the array copy method. So traditionally, array copy copies len elements from an array source, starting at an index in source, to a dest array that we call dest r, starting from an index dest. Okay, so in this problem, we're doing something basically the exact same as traditional array copy, but now our object source is going to be an int list, which we'll call a source list. So continuing to read the prompt, it continues, to simplify things, let's restrict ourselves to only using an int array and assume that source list and dest are not null. Additionally, assume that source pos, dest pos, and len will not cause an index out of bound exception to be thrown. So kind of takeaway here is let's kind of forget about like behavior that might cause errors. Okay, so here's a quick example that they give to us. If I have the list L that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I have this int array R, which is an empty array of length 3, then if I call array copy from int list from L starting at index 1 into R starting at index 0, and I'm copying 3 elements, it'll give me, or it'll set R as 2, 3, 4. Okay, so the reason it sets R to be 2, 3, 4 is that we're taking 3 elements, right? 3 is len, from R starting from index 1, which corresponds to this sublist, and we're putting that in R. Okay, so the next thing that I would like to do if I'm a student, I'm walking through this problem on an exam perhaps, is I want to read the skeleton code, just kind of break it up and see what it's telling me. So we have 2 for loops here, right? And we probably should ask ourselves, why do we have 2 for loops? So a for loop means that we need to iterate, right? So what type of iteration are we doing here, and why do we have 2 iterations that we're doing? So I definitely recommend pausing the video here, trying to figure out for yourself, like intuitively, why do I have 2 for loops? How does that kind of correspond to the problem that we're trying to solve? So my reasoning and my intuition here is that if I have some int list, and let's say I want to start at this index, we want to get to this index somehow, right? So before we can even start any of the copying, we have to get to this index. So what we can say is that this first for loop is just getting to the index in source list. Okay, so that's the main purpose of this first for loop, is probably getting to that index from where we can start the copying, right? And then the second for loop would then probably be to execute the copying. So this one we can say is to execute. Okay, so now with this kind of setup in mind, let's create an example. Let's walk through the algorithm on the example, and let's try to generalize an algorithm from there that we could then put back in the skeleton code that's provided, right? So we could have used this example here. I decided to make an example that's a little bit bigger, a little more rigorous. So I have this example here that I already created ahead of time. So we have source list, we have our source position, which corresponds to this index in the given int list source list. Then we have our destination array, which let's just say starts off empty. The values of the destination array don't really matter in the beginning. And then I have my destination pos, and then I have my len. Okay, so our expected behavior here is that we want to take the piece from source position 2 of length 2, right? We want to take this area right here and copy it, right?
Powering off.
Shoot, sorry about that. So we want to take the elements 2 and 3 and put them right here, right? That's our expected behavior. And the reason why we're doing this is that we're starting in source position, we're taking 2 elements, right? And we're putting them into the destination array starting at destination position 3, right? Okay, so now that we kind of understand what our expected behavior is, let's make this happen, right? Let's write some code. So the first thing we wanted to do was we need to have some way of accessing this node. Right? And we kind of said that accessing this node is going to happen in this first for loop here, right? So looking at this first for loop, what we can kind of notice to ourselves is that there's one assignment here, right? And we have some sort of iteration at the top. So the idea that kind of strikes me is that we want to get to this node, right? Well, the reason we want to get to this node is because this node is the one that's at index 2, okay? So if our source position is 2, it means that I need to skip 1, 2 nodes, right? So the number source position 2 kind of corresponds to the number of nodes we need to skip. So in order to skip one node, what we can do is I have source list here. Let's call these let's say this is head and tail. Okay, so in order to skip one node, what I can do is I can say source list is going to be equal to source list dot tail, right? What that will do, I'll just write it down here because that's actually part of the solution. If I do source list is equal to source list dot tail, what this is doing, it's taking this source list, and now we're going to be pointing to the second node, right? More specifically, then our source list kind of looks like so. Okay, so every time I execute this, we're skipping one node in this int list. So the idea is how many times should we execute this? Well, in our example, since the source position is 2, and it corresponds to skipping 2 nodes, we should have some for loop that executes source pause times, right? So I'm just going to clear this for the sake of space. Okay, so we can go ahead and add some code up here so that this for loop executes source pause times. Oops. Okay, so that's kind of our for loop. And it's really helpful as we're writing our code, we should have our example up and we can kind of be executing the algorithm on the example. So at this point, what's happened here is now we're pointing source list to the node, which is our source position, right? Or the node at our source pause, okay? So now what we want to do is we need to execute a loop that goes len times, right? So what we can do is I could say for int I is equal to 0, I is less than len, I plus equals 1, okay? So for each value of I, we should take what's at the node source list is pointing to and put that at our destination position, right? Because our current destination position is here. So the first time I go in my for loop, I should say, hey, the value at source list dot head, or the value at source list dot head, we should put it at destination pause or dest pause, okay? And then what we need to do is we need to prepare for the next iteration by moving source list down here, right? So how we can kind of make this all happen is that the first thing we wanted to do was in our destination array at, well, the first time we come, we should be at despause. And then as I gets bigger and bigger, what we should be doing is we should be going through this array, right? So what we can say is that I can go at despause plus I here, right? Okay, so we're going to be setting this equal to source list dot head, and then we can then prepare for the next iteration by doing source list is equal to source list dot tail. Okay, another equivalent solution, which I think is actually in the solutions, is that our for loop kind of reads for int I equals despause, I is less than despause plus len, I plus equals 1. So that's our for loop, what that reads. And the change here is that now this simplifies to just I. Okay, so in essence, both things are essentially the same. It doesn't really matter which one we choose. Okay, so that's really all for this problem. I hope you all enjoyed this video walkthrough, and yeah, have a good start to your semester.